E.T. the Extra-Terrestrial wasn't just a hit, it was the highest-grossing film ever made when it opened in 1982, a record it held for 11 years. Directed by Steven Spielberg and starring Henry Thomas, Drew Barrymore, Dee Wallace, Robert McNaughton, and Peter Coyote, it cost $10.5 million and changed.
This is a rescue movie. I always thought E.T. was a movie about a double rescue.
Really? What a science fiction film could feel like. Today we're counting down 17 weird facts about E.T. Stick around for number 1, because Columbia Pictures passed on the film and accidentally made it the most profitable movie in their history anyway. 17. E.T. began as a horror film about alien attackers. E.T. did not start as a warm family story. It started as Night Skies, a dark project Spielberg developed with screenwriter John Sayles, about a family terrorized by malevolent aliens who could kill with a touch of their bony fingers. The only sympathetic creature in the story was one called Buddy, a gentle alien left behind who befriended an autistic child. Spielberg had Rick Baker building alien creatures. Tobe Hooper, director of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, was in line to direct it. The project fell apart when Spielberg, shooting Raiders of the Lost Ark in Tunisia, realized he wanted to make something closer to Close Encounters than to a siege film. The horror movie died. The friendly alien survived. One small subplot from the darkest project Spielberg had ever developed became the most beloved film he ever made. 16. The script was written in 8 weeks on a Raiders set. Melissa Matheson was on the set of Raiders of the Lost Ark, visiting her then-boyfriend Harrison Ford when Spielberg read her the Night Skies premise. She cried. He asked her to write it. She initially refused. Ford and Spielberg talked her into it. Matheson compared the story to Winnie the Pooh if Christopher Robin's imaginary friend were an alien. She wrote the first draft in 8 weeks. Spielberg later called it the best first draft he had ever read, claiming he could have started shooting it the next day. He kept the script on 3x5 note cards in his shirt pocket throughout production. Matheson's parents had divorced when she was a teenager, which gave the screenplay its emotional specificity. The woman who wrote one of Hollywood's most emotionally precise films was persuaded to write it on a different film's set by an actor she was dating. 15. The film was shot under a fake title. Spielberg was obsessed with secrecy during production. The film was shot under the cover name A Boy's Life, specifically to conceal the plot from rival producers. Every actor had to read the script behind closed doors. Every person on set wore a photo ID badge. Spielberg used a working title he frequently recycled for projects he wanted to protect from being plagiarized before completion. The precaution was not paranoia. Night Skies itself had already attracted legal scrutiny, and several other writers would later file plagiarism claims against E.T. that were all thrown out in court. A film built on the most universal emotional premise Spielberg had ever conceived was protected like a state secret from the day it was written to the day it opened. 14. Henry Thomas's audition made everyone in the room cry. Henry Thomas initially did not impress anyone at his formal audition. He was stiff and self-conscious in standard testing. Arrived wearing an Indiana Jones costume, clearly nervous. Then the casting director tried something different, an improvised scene where Thomas had to persuade a government agent not to take away his alien friend. Thomas slipped completely into the moment. He began to cry with genuine conviction, not from performance, but from imagination. Spielberg, watching off camera, told him he had the part out loud before the scene was even finished. Thomas later said, "The tears came from thinking about his dead dog." The child who had been flat in formal testing accessed something real the moment the structure was removed. Spielberg found his Elliot in an improvised 30-second scene that reduced the room to silence. 13. Drew Barrymore told Spielberg she was in a punk rock band. Drew Barrymore was 6 years old when she auditioned for E.T. She had originally tried out for the role of Carol Ann in Poltergeist, but Spielberg felt she wasn't right for it. When she came in for Gertie, she told Spielberg she wasn't really an actress, that she was the drummer for a punk rock band called the Purple People Eaters. Spielberg cast her immediately. The combination of boldness, storytelling, and total disregard for the expected behavior of a 6-year-old auditioning for a major film was exactly the quality he needed for Gertie's fearless approach to an alien in her bedroom. Spielberg later said he wanted everyone in the film to be childlike, and Barrymore demonstrated it more purely than anyone he had met. She had no idea E.T. wasn't real. He made sure of it, telling her the puppet was an actual living alien throughout production. 12. Spielberg shot the film in chronological order. Spielberg made a deliberate choice unusual for a major production. He shot E.T. from beginning to end in story sequence. The decision was entirely about the children. He wanted Henry Thomas, Drew Barrymore, and Robert McNaughton to genuinely discover and bond with E.T. over the course of filming, building a real emotional relationship that the camera could capture rather than manufacture. By the time the quarantine sequences arrived, when E.T. appears to die, the children had already spent weeks bonding with the puppet as though it were alive. Their distress in those scenes is not entirely performed. The final goodbye scene was deliberately shot last, so the cast's sadness at separating from E.T. was completely real. Spielberg later described it as a slightly sadistic move. It was also the most effective one he made. 11 M&Ms said no, and Reese's Pieces paid the price in sales. The original script called for Elliot to use M&Ms to lure E.T. into the house. Spielberg and producer Kathleen Kennedy approached Mars Inc. for permission. Mars declined. Kennedy later said the company was being asked to take a leap of faith that the film would be something they'd be comfortable associating their product with. Product placement was relatively new business practice in 1982. After Mars said no, the Hershey Company was approached about Reese's Pieces. They agreed. The scene was filmed with the orange and yellow candy trail. After the film opened, Reese's Pieces sales reportedly increased by around 65%. Mars had been offered one of the most valuable product placements in cinema history and passed. They watched a competitor's candy become synonymous with one of the most successful films ever made. 10. The Yoda cameo was a secret joke between Spielberg and Lucas. The child dressed as Yoda during the Halloween trick-or-treating sequence was Spielberg's private joke aimed at George Lucas. E.T. spots the costume, becomes excited, follows the child down the street crying, "Home?" suggesting he recognizes something familiar. John Williams underscored the moment by weaving Yoda's theme from The Empire Strikes Back into the music. Spielberg didn't tell Lucas about the gag until he screened the finished film for him privately at Skywalker Ranch. Lucas laughed. When he made The Phantom Menace, he returned the favor. 3 members of E.T.'s species appear in the Galactic Senate. 2 friends who had changed cinema together placed each other's creations in each other's universes as private gestures. Neither ever made it an official crossover. It remains one of cinema's most warmly maintained inside jokes. 9. Spielberg never storyboarded a single-shot E.T. was the first major Spielberg production on which he did not storyboard. Raiders of the Lost Ark had been extensively pre-visualized. Jaws had been planned with precise technical detail out of necessity. For E.T., Spielberg deliberately abandoned that structure. He wanted to remain available to the children, ready to follow whatever happened on set rather than impose a predetermined visual plan on actors who couldn't always deliver on cue. He improvised shots around performances rather than fitting performances into shots. The approach gave the film its documentary quality in the early sequences, the handheld intimacy of Elliot's world, the way the camera stays at child height throughout. A director who had mastered technical control gave it up specifically to stay present with 3 children and a puppet. The results were the most emotionally authentic work of his career. 8. The government agent is only ever called Keys. Peter Coyote plays the lead government agent pursuing E.T. throughout the film. He never receives a name. The character is referred to only as Keys because of the enormous key ring that hangs from his belt and appears in several close-up shots before the character's face is ever seen. The choice was structural and intentional. The early portion of the film is shot from child height, following the visual logic of a 10-year-old who registers adults as looming faceless presences, defined by their accessories rather than their identities. Keys is experienced as a threat before he is experienced as a person. The decision to strip the character of a name was not an oversight. It was Spielberg's method of keeping the entire film inside Elliot's point of view. Adults are features of the environment, until they earn a different kind of attention. 7. The sets were built on stilts for the puppet. The animatronic E.T. puppet, built by Carlo Rambaldi, was extremely heavy and required being bolted to the floor. For every interior scene involving the puppet, Elliot's bedroom, the living room, the kitchen, the production designers built the sets raised on stilts. The puppet was secured beneath with its wiring hidden under the raised platform, and the puppeteers monitored and controlled its performance from an adjacent room via TV monitors. Spielberg insisted that everyone on set treat E.T. as a real actor for maximum believability. All puppet movements were tested extensively before production began to ensure the illusion wouldn't break. The sets of a suburban California home in one of cinema's most naturalistic films were constructed entirely around the mechanical requirements of a creature that weighed more than most of the children acting alongside it. 6. The bicycle scene was recut to follow the music. The flying bicycle sequence, the most iconic image in the film, was originally cut to picture with John Williams composing music to match the edited footage. Williams screened it, then asked Spielberg if he could try something different. Spielberg turned off the film and had Williams conduct the orchestra as though they were performing in concert. A continuous piece with no regard for the cut points. When Spielberg heard what Williams had composed freely, he immediately preferred it. He went back and recut the entire flying sequence to match Williams' music rather than the other way around. The image of Elliot and E.T. silhouetted against the moon works the way it does specifically because the music was written first, and the picture rearranged to serve it. Williams won the Academy Award for Best Score. The sequence it produced is arguably the most recognizable visual in Spielberg's entire filmography. 5. Columbia passed on the film and kept 5% of the profits. E.T. originated at Columbia Pictures through the Night Skies development deal. When the project transformed into something gentler, Columbia was given first refusal. They passed. Universal's Sid Sheinberg stepped in and bought the project out of Columbia's development slate, paying back the $1 million Columbia had already spent. As part of the deal, Columbia retained 5% of net profits. E.T. became the highest-grossing film in history. At the time of its release, Columbia had passed on the film, spent $1 million developing it, handed it to a competitor, and collected 5% of the most successful movie of the decade as a result. Columbia executive Veitch later admitted that year they made more on E.T. than on any of their own films. The studio that said no still made more money from it than almost anyone could have predicted. 4. Cannes gave it a standing ovation before it ended. E.T. was shown out of competition at the 1982 Cannes Film Festival before its theatrical release. Spielberg had privately worried the film was too personal, too emotionally specific to his own childhood, too dependent on audiences identifying with an unattractive alien character. Cannes answered that question. The standing ovation began 15 minutes before the film was finished. The audience was still applauding when the credits ended. 15 minutes after the film concluded, Spielberg knew in that room that the film had worked. A director who had made 2 record-breaking blockbusters was genuinely uncertain about whether this quieter, more personal film would connect. Cannes told him 30 minutes before the credits finished rolling. 3. George Lucas returned the favor in The Phantom Menace. When George Lucas saw the Yoda joke Spielberg had hidden in E.T., he filed it away for later use. 17 years later, while making The Phantom Menace, Lucas placed 3 members of E.T.'s species inside the Galactic Senate, visible in the chamber during the political debate sequences. The placement was entirely deliberate. Lucas confirmed it was a direct response to Spielberg's Halloween gag. 2 of the most commercially successful directors in history had been quietly building a shared mythology between their franchises across 2 decades, entirely through background details no studio executive had approved, and no audience was required to notice. 2. Shelley Long turned down the mother role. Before Dee Wallace was cast as Mary, Elliot's mother, the role was offered to Shelley Long. Long passed. She chose to appear in the Ron Howard comedy Night Shift instead. Wallace had come to Spielberg's attention through her audition for Used Cars years earlier. He had been struck by her vulnerability and what he described as a childlike openness, the quality he wanted in every adult in the film. Mary is present at the edges of her children's experience rather than at its center. which required an actress who could convey warmth and barely manage grief without demanding the camera's attention. Wallace delivered exactly that. 1. Columbia passed on E.T. and made it their most profitable film anyway. The full accounting of Columbia's relationship with E.T. is one of Hollywood's most remarkable pieces of accidental irony. The studio had developed Night Skies. They were given first refusal on the transformed version they declined. They surrendered the project to Universal for $1 million reimbursement and a 5% profit participation clause that seemed like a consolation prize at the time. E.T. grossed $792 million worldwide on its original release. It became the highest-grossing film in history, a record it held for 11 years until Jurassic Park, also a Spielberg film, surpassed it. A film born from a horror project written in 8 weeks, shot in order, and accidentally made a rival studio rich. Which fact hit you hardest? Drop it in the comments. Subscribe for more deep dives into the films that changed everything without meaning to. Until next time,